Good morning, everyone. I'm Jillian Black, and welcome to the Department of Family and Support Services Hotel Program for Survivors of Gender-Based Violence and Human Trafficking RFP webinar. Joining me today is Adriana Camarda and Laura Ng with our Gender-Based Violence Division, here to provide details and to answer any questions you may have regarding this RFP. Just a few housekeeping rules. Due to the volume of participants, everyone has been placed on mute. Please submit questions via the question box, and we'll respond to questions at the midpoint and at the end of the presentation. Please use the question box to notify us of any technical issues. Please be advised that this webinar is being recorded. Anything stated at this webinar is not intended to change the solicitation document. Any changes will be in the form of writing of an addendum issued by the Department of Family and Support Services. The purpose of this webinar is to provide information for the solicitation. A copy of the recording will be posted on the DFSS YouTube channel with a link to the recording, and a PDF of the PowerPoint slides will be posted to the DFSS webpage at cityofchicago.gov under alerts and or funding opportunities tabs. Please give it up to 5 business days to upload. DFSS retains the right to share a list of registrants to this webinar, along with their contact and organizational information at our discretion. Does the team like to introduce themselves?
Yeah, hi, my name is Laura Ng, she, her pronouns. I am a project manager over at the Department of Family and Support Services Division on Gender-Based Violence.
Good morning, I'm Adriana Camarda, supervisor over the Division on Gender-Based Violence here at DFSS.
Thank you. Now that we've gone through the welcome and introductions, we're gonna delve into the purpose, the background of the RFP, information about the scope and program description, the selection criteria, timeline, technical assistance for applicants in e-procurement, and then one last round for questions. So with that being said, Laura and Adriana, please take it away.
Sounds good, thanks, Jillian. So we'll dive right into the purpose of this RFP. You'll notice that the name of the RFP is the Hotel Program for Survivors of Gender-Based Violence. In the title slide, I put "and human trafficking" in parentheses because we do want to ensure that this is a program that will serve survivors of all forms of gender-based violence, including sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So onto the purpose of this, we seek to provide emergency and short-term hotel stays for individuals and their families who are fleeing gender-based violence or human trafficking. The second point here, along with hotel stays, we know folks are fleeing while they're in crisis. So applicants must be able to assist directly or through subdelegates, both financially and logistically, with food, transportation, and case management until more stable housing is identified. We want to make sure that, of course, we're not just putting folks and households into emergency hotel rooms without that access to food and transportation and case management. Lastly, DFSS is seeking respondents with experience in providing trauma-informed, culturally competent services that are survivor-centered and delivered by staff that are qualified and trained to provide services to the focused populations they intend to serve. So a little bit of background of why we developed this RFP in the first place, and really are excited that we're able to provide this opportunity. According to the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline, if folks are familiar, they just released their Measuring Safety 2023 data based on their hotline calls, and they have found that shelter beds were full more than a third of 2023, which was 124 days. Requests for shelter, which is the top service need among survivor contacts, have increased year to year statewide with a staggering 45% increase from 2022 to 2023. And so far in 2024, that same hotline receives an average of about 17 shelter requests per day. And we all know that we just don't have the need, we don't have the availability like that within the city of Chicago. Those fleeing gender-based violence or human trafficking typically cannot risk waiting for a shelter bed to open and require emergency short-term placement to get away from the person choosing to abuse them. And then to support all the statistics that we've so far shared with you, we in our division conducted a needs assessment last year in 2023, collecting information and feedback from both service providers in the community and survivors themselves. And the two highest needs, which are probably not going to be a surprise to anybody, that were identified were mental health and housing support. So that emergency housing piece, as well as that case management piece, are essential in the applications that we are looking to receive for this RFP. So moving on to the goals of this RFP, essentially the GBV hotel program wants to support individuals and families experiencing homelessness as a result of gender-based violence or human trafficking in being placed into appropriate emergency housing, providing them with safe, accessible place to stay. We want folks to be able to connect households with appropriate longer-term permanent housing options and community services and resources that will help clients obtain and maintain housing through building income and addressing a variety of physical, mental, emotional, and all other needs that they may have, but not all, and other needs that they may have. Providing additional emergency shelter, additional meaning on top of the ones that are already existing for all survivors of gender-based violence and human trafficking, including those that they may not have been appropriately placed in existing DV shelters. We want to highlight populations like male survivors and survivors who are LGBTQ+. Typically, those are the populations that we find don't qualify for standard DV shelters, just the way that they identify, to close the portion of the gap of emergency shelter or survivors in crisis. So moving on to additional information of why we released this RFP in the first place. Our Homeless Services Division, which is right down the hall from us, does currently fund 146 shelter beds specifically for survivors of domestic violence. Among those same shelter beds in 2023, the average number of days that we found that folks were staying in those shelters was 56 days. We know that survivors of other forms of gender-based violence outside of domestic violence who are trying to flee do not have dedicated sexual assault or human trafficking shelters to go to. We also know that survivors who do not fit within specific shelter criteria, including gender identity or household size, do not qualify for many traditional shelters. And so we want to improve on all of that with this program. The target population, I think we talked a lot about it already so far in the last several minutes, but the target population for this RFP are persons and or households experiencing domestic violence, human trafficking, and or sexual violence that have or are attempting to flee their situation. Persons who have historically been unable to meet criteria standards that we just discussed for standard shelters should be prioritized, for example, male or LGBTQ+ identities. When we're talking about program requirements, I think a lot of this that we're covering, of course, are directly copied and pasted from the RFP. So, of course, we always encourage you to read the RFP maybe more than once, cover to cover. But copied and pasted from the RFP include providing a safe environment with a place to sleep free of charge and with a low barrier to entry, which, of course, when we're talking about a low barrier to entry, we're making sure that folks are provided with housing first, without requirements for example, ceasing substance use or other things that might prerequisite someone from accessing the shelter program. Providing basic needs alongside with the housing, including meals or kitchen access, showers and toiletries, laundry access, and then limited household items and storage as folks will need in their emergency situations. Providing connection to housing options like longer term stays or the coordinated entry system, and supporting clients in identifying and navigating other housing options. Providing access to case management that is directly a part of this program. We are also asking that applicants serve as a liaison with the hotels and motels directly. We want to make sure that, as we're prioritizing survivor confidentiality and anonymity, that you are the ones who are communicating with hotels and motels directly. You also must accept referrals from the Salvation Army and outreach providers, or commonly known as our 311 system, the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline, the Chicago Rape Crisis Hotline, and the Human Trafficking Hotline operated by the Salvation Army SAPIT program. We will do our best to educate the Salvation Army and outreach providers who do use 311 to redirect folks to the gender-based violence specific hotlines that are named here. But we are looking for applicants who are able to serve survivors from all three of those main GBV hotlines. And then lastly, when we're talking about program requirements, we want to know that staff are meeting minimum training standards as outlined in the RFP. There's a whole table in the RFP that talks about the minimum training standards that we are asking for folks who are directly interacting with the survivors in this program to have received, including 40-hour training, as well as specific training for human trafficking if that is the population you are serving. Continuing on with program requirements, because this is a shelter program, essentially, we're also adhering to the Chicago Continuum of Care's core values, which of course include a housing first approach, harm reduction, trauma-informed care, and then inclusion of persons with lived experience input. There's a lot of different ways that you can incorporate survivor experience, all the way from soliciting, of course, participant feedback with the folks that you are serving, as well as through your own personal staff, if they have lived experience, all the way to your board of directors. We do define all four of these points in the RFP. So if some of these terms are newer to you, please make sure that you are reviewing the RFP to ensure that we're on the same page of how we're defining these bullet points here. Alongside with the fact that we are essentially running a shelter program, adhering to the continuum of care and the Department of Family and Support Services requirements includes all of these bullet points here. The copy of these slides will be published for you, but of course it includes things that are pretty standard, that we're informing participants of their rights, responsibilities, and expectations, that we're not discriminating, we're providing reasonable accommodations. We have written policies and procedures for intake, grievance, and how conflicts and other crises will be addressed and resolved. We're not requiring clients or participants to participate in any religious services or other forms of religious expression. We're also looking for facilities that you're contracting with and hotels and motels that comply with local building, fire, environmental, health, and safety standards. We do have an annual point in time count, if that's something that's a little bit newer to you. This is once a year in January that we do a count of all the persons that we can identify that are experiencing homelessness within a single evening in Chicago. And then lastly, programs must accept referrals from DFSS and delegate agencies managing shelter intake and provide daily data on bed and bedroom or room availability, essentially. We can clarify that more, but essentially we will want to know how much availability you have in your program for these emergency hotel and motel stays on a regular basis. Moving on to performance goals and outcomes. We are, of course, going to be collecting data. We're going to be following up with folks, to understand what you're about to see in this slide here. But we're essentially seeking respondents with evidence of strong past performance against desired outcome goals. Performance indicators will include the average length of stay as compared to shelter average of about 60 days. So earlier in the presentation, I had mentioned that of the DV shelter, of the DV shelters that we currently manage at DFSS, we have seen an average of folks staying about 56 days. We also want to see that 25% of participants exit to more stable or permanent housing. I do want to make a point here that if you are an agency that has your own shelter program, if you're moving a participant from a hotel room into your shelter, that does not count as more stable or permanent housing. It does have to essentially be more stable or permanent housing. We also want to know that the last couple of bullet points are probably going to be based on your participant survey feedback data. 80% of participants know more about available community resources. And then we also want to know that 80% of participants felt supported in making their own decisions. More on performance goals and outcomes to monitor and recognize intermediate progress towards the above performance indicators. DFSS also intends to track output metrics that may include but are not limited to, and we say that not limited to because we will work with delegates to figure out, what it is that we should expand on in terms of outputs and metrics. But we want to make sure that your hotel capacity is at 80% utilization every night. You know, we know when we're talking about survivors of gender-based violence, there's a number of folks who are in that crisis mode. And so if we're not filling at 80% capacity, then we need to really look at, you know, what it is that our limitations are going to be. We want to see that 100% of the participants entering into this program do complete a coordinated entry system assessment. There are two separate CESs, or coordinated entry system. There's one that's specifically for gender-based violence survivors, and then one that's the general CES. We can talk about that with the awarded delegate more in detail. We'll also be monitoring all of these metrics by certain demographics. That will include age, ethnicity, gender, race, and some other characteristics, and then we'll work on what those demographics are together with the awarded agencies. This is when we really want to pay attention to today's presentation here. The selection criteria are super important. This is where you are entering your answers to the questions that are posed in the application. So there's more detail about this, of course, in the full RFP. So once again, read that cover to cover, maybe more than once. But the first element that we are evaluating folks on is going to be community involvement. We want to see that you're demonstrating a clear understanding of the target population, including their needs and challenges. We want to make sure that the respondent has expertise working with the target population and has relevant capabilities and our infrastructure needed to serve this group. We also want to make sure that the respondent demonstrates a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. This is not just about the folks that you are outreaching to and are including in your program, but this also permeates into your internal structure and all the way up into your board of directors. Secondly, organizational capacity. We want to make sure that the respondent has qualified staff, inclusive of the minimum training requirements outlined in the RFP. It is really important that you do pay attention to that table in the RFP of what we're looking for to ensure that your staff is trained to serve the target population. And of course, this qualified staff, these are the staff that are responsible for program oversight and management. We want to make sure that the respondent has adequate systems and processes to support monitoring program expenditures and fiscal controls. And then lastly, we want to make sure that the respondent has adequate staffing capacity to hire and manage staff. So you'll notice that this slide, compared to the last couple of slides, is pretty lengthy. This is where we're, when you look at the RFP, you'll see this is where the most amount of points is going to be allocated to. We want to make sure that your proposed program has a strength that we need in order to run a successful emergency hotel program. So the respondent clearly defines services to be provided either directly or through partnerships or linkage agreements with other agencies or through subdelegates that are appropriate to addressing needs of and achieving desired outcomes for the target population. So we want to see those linkage agreements. There's going to be a checklist to make sure that you're also attaching certain addendums to your application. So if you have those formal agreements, we'll want to see them. The respondent's proposed program is supported by strong national or local evidence-based and or aligns with best practices for the relevant field. So you'll be supporting your program proposal with some evidence there. The respondent has partnerships or coordinates with referring agencies to expand or improve services in a client-centered, comprehensive way. The respondent also has strong partnerships with hotels and or short-term stay platforms or has a detailed plan to provide these partnerships. So if these are not existing partnerships that you currently have with hotels or motels, then we want to know your step-by-step method for creating those partnerships. And, you know, we're of course looking for something that's a little bit, that is more detailed so that we can picture how you're really going to do this if they're not already existing. The respondent has an effective approach to partnering or coordinating with other agencies to expand or improve services available to gender-based violence survivors that is delivered in a survivor-centered, comprehensive way that is inclusive of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. I'll take a pause here to explain that while this RFP is of course focused on survivors of gender-based violence and human trafficking, we know that the umbrella term of gender-based violence is extremely expansive, but when we're talking about the purposes of this program, we are specifically focused on survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. Fourth category of selection criteria: performance management and outcomes. We want to make sure that the respondent demonstrates there's an asterisk there. The asterisk is actually outlined for you in the RFP, but it's about, allowing us, not allowing, but we will, if it's available, looking at past performance data. That's what that asterisk refers to. Demonstrates evidence of strong past performance against desired outcome goals and performance metrics and or other notable accomplishments in providing services to the target population. So if this is a new program for you, then we'll want to make sure that you have also strong past performance, an example you might provide for us. The respondent has experience using data to inform or improve its services or practices. The respondent can disaggregate data demographics to identify disparities in their program delivery. So for example, are you able to not only provide us the demographics of participants that you're serving, but are you able to look at maybe certain age populations or certain ethnicities or gender to see if there's any disparities in the service delivery or how they're accessing services or how they're getting connected to longer term housing options. And then lastly here, the respondent has the relevant systems and processes needed to collect and store key participant and performance data in a secure manner to maintain survivor confidentiality. You'll know that if you've ever worked with us at all, we stress survivor confidentiality a lot, ensuring that folks understand what confidentiality means, and that is a primary proponent of any program that we run at our division on gender-based violence. And then lastly, in selection criteria, we're looking for reasonable cost, budget justification, and leverage of funds. So this includes that you'll have the fiscal risk capacity to implement the proposed program. And then you'll also be able to demonstrate reasonable implementation costs and funding requests relative to its financial and human resources. The proposed budget supports a proposed scope of work or work plan. So if you're filling out an application, you're going to be telling us that you're going to be doing all of these things, but then the budget that you submit doesn't necessarily maybe match what the capacity of you being able to do all of these things look like, then we'll be looking for some of those disconnects if they're present there for us. I mentioned attachments earlier in this presentation, but some of these are pretty standard for if you've ever applied for an RFP with us at DFSS, but be sure to attach reports, studies, or other documentation that show performance toward reaching program goals, demonstrate results and accomplishments. Be sure to attach complete job descriptions for every staff person listed on personnel budget. Be sure to attach resumes for key staff that are overseeing the program if they're already existing in your agency. Be sure to attach your organization's 12-month budget for this program and make sure all program requirements are addressed in that budget. So once again, back to that comment that I just made earlier, that if you're proposing a program and there's elements of that program that aren't reflected in your budget, then that might be just a red flag for us. And be sure to attach formal linkage agreements with other agencies that serve survivors of gender-based violence to provide ongoing counseling, legal or survivor advocacy services. And this is not limited, of course, to that list of services if you yourself do not provide any of these services directly. And then lastly, be sure to attach a list of other formal written linkage agreements between the respondent and other service providers that enhance the array of services offered to survivors. The list should detail who the linkages are with and what services they agree to provide for your participants. So the difference in the last couple of bullet points is that we want to see the actual formal linkage agreements if you have them with other agencies that specifically serve survivors of gender-based violence. The second one is more for other practical resources that your participants might need to access that may not be directly gender-based violence related. When we're talking about the evaluation process, this is really kind of what we do here internally. You're going to be evaluated on the strengths of the proposal and the responsiveness of the selection criteria, which are, of course, all the several slides that we just went over. Failure to submit a complete proposal or respond fully to all requirements may make your submission subject to rejection. Our commissioner, upon review of recommended agencies, may reject, deny, or recommend agencies that have applied for grants based on previous performance and or area need. And then we reserve the right to ensure that all mandated services are available citywide and provided in a linguistically and culturally appropriate manner. Here are some key important dates for you. Obviously, we are doing the pre-proposal webinar right now on Friday, October 11th for folks. If you have questions after this pre-proposal webinar, you must submit them to myself by Thursday, October 7th, myself, right? By Thursday, October 17th by 5 p.m. And then your final applications are due in iSupplier by November 6th at 12 p.m. That is a hard deadline. So make sure that you are looking at the RFP and the RFP questions well ahead of that time. And then we are looking to start this program on January 1 of 2025. And then at this point, I'm going to hand it on over to Adriana to talk about the budgets and cost proposals.
Thank you, Laura. You did a great job so far, by the way. Very engaging. The summary of here in the budget, we can't stress enough to consider when you're proposing for this project, your budget submission. Your budget submission is, like Laura alluded to, we look at it in all of the selection criteria. It's not just, graded or scored with your budget section. So we just want you to be cognizant that the term of this contract is from January 1st of 2025. The budget period will go to December 2025. So with your proposal, we would like you to submit a 12-month budget for that year. On the third bullet, in your budget narrative, you have an opportunity to talk about what is your administrative cost under this proposal, as well as you're eligible to take indirect. We want to see that in the budget narrative and addressed. There is currently no match requirement for this program, but when you submit the budget proposal, we understand that you have other programs. And if you have any resources, you can definitely put them in the other section. The budget form in iSupplier or eProcurement looks a little bit like a city form or a DFSS budget form, but it's much more streamlined and you don't have to list all of these things out. Like I said, please submit a budget for a full 12 months so that we can use that accordingly. Look at the instructions and make sure your cost category definitions that you've put things in the correct lines, whether that be materials and supplies or whether that be operational costs. Some of the things that are eligible under this budget, definitely you can have sub-partners, as Laura alluded to, that we would like to see those in your contract costs. Materials and supplies is definitely a cost that you would be budgeting. And based on the need of survivors being placed in hotels for food or for meals or for any household items, we would definitely see in your, your other line, your line 99 line, whether you have client assistance, and there you can be as very detailed about what you're going to be providing the survivors directly, or if you have a subcontract for that service. One thing that you keep in mind, although we have available for this project $600,000, we urge you to ask for an amount that generally reflects what you want to do in your project. And so the rule is, and I think the commissioner told me this many years ago, we can give you money, but we can only give you what you ask for. So if you come in low, on your bid or your proposal, that is the maximum that we can give you under the proposal. So be very realistic about what you can do and what you can't do, and staff salaries need to be very equitable and things like that. So those are the things that we will be looking for, the realism in your budget. And then finally, like I said, use realistic costs and estimates on the hotel rooms, the acquisitions of these rooms, and where you're going to make them available. Those costs for your hotel would also be under client assistance in the proposal. It would not be under a contract unless you were actually already presupposing that you have a set of rooms under contract. Okay, feel free to ask questions on that. Here are some common errors in my many years of looking at proposals and looking at budgets. Some of the common areas we see are in the fringe and personnel and not reflecting that correctly. A lot of the errors where it won't cost you very much here in the proposal process, but eventually will cost you in trying to get your contract executed, Making sure that your supplies are there, making sure that if you are providing meals and you are providing client assistance, be realistic on what that cost will be. The client assistance is allowable. You should not definitely, you know, avoid it or think that you can just provide it in another cost. You should be your proposal should include everything that you plan to provide survivors or that you can think of. And put it in the appropriate column. When I can't recall in iSupplier exactly, and maybe Jillian can cover this later in the presentation. It's a cost to the city that you're requesting. Make sure all of your requests is in there for your full proposal. The other column is sort of matched. That's not necessarily required or other. So please put that in there and be able to show what is your request and what is your match. You'd be surprised how many proposals come in and never really discuss like what their proposal amount is, and we have to rely on your budget. So make sure that you're completing that correctly and ask questions or reach out to us if you have questions. All right, I'm gonna hand it back to Laura, I guess, right?
I can actually take it from here. Just another reminder that applications are due November 6, 2024 at 12 noon Central Time. Before I delve into how to accept an amendment and submit an application, I wanted to pause for questions. I do see we have one question. And the question is, can organizations that run the partner hotlines, they're saying DV, rape crisis, human trafficking, etc., apply for this grant?
Yes, you being an agency or a delegate that runs one of the local or national or state hotlines does not preclude you from running this program.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Just a couple application tips. We cannot stress enough to start your application as early as possible and to save as often as possible. If you have never done business with the City of Chicago, please register into iSupplier/eProcurement ASAP. Review RFP narratives and application questions closely. Remember that they align with the scope and selection criteria. Please use the information in the RFP for guidance in formulating your answers. There is a 4,000 character limit, which includes punctuation and spaces. Each response is allotted 4,000 characters. And whatever you do, please do not use the back button on your browser. To submit multiple applications for a single RFP, applicants will need to set up a unique user account in iSupplier. The e-procurement system is not capable of submitting more than one distinct proposal per associated email address. Therefore, you must use a separate email address for each submission. You can submit your application and later amend it up until the due date of November 6th at 12 noon. Avoid the rush and possible mishaps by submitting your application early. Plan on submission taking about 30 to 60 minutes. Please be advised that we cannot accept late applications. And make use of the eProcurement hotline for help at 312-744-4357. This hotline operates during business hours only, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And then we can't stress it enough to save your application as often as possible and to submit it as early as you can. Just a couple of new agency requirements. We require articles of incorporation and any amended articles of incorporation. We also require an IRS affirmation letter. This is for not-for-profit agencies only. The letter must be dated within 60 days of submission. You can obtain this letter by calling the IRS directly at 1-877-829-5500. If you are a for-profit agency, submit your original letter from the IRS showing your FEIN number. A UEI number is also required in addition to the central contractor registration. And this can be provided found on the entity overview page on the sam.gov website. And lastly, a certificate of good standing letter with the state of Illinois is required. As of April of this year, we have a new labor peace agreement ordinance. which will apply to all DFSS and CDPH delegates that have 20 or more employees working for their organization. The only exemption is it does not apply to hospitals. Contractor must provide written notice to the commissioner or her designee within 72 hours of becoming aware that employees want to organize or that a union seeks to represent employees. Contractor must enter into the LPA within 90 days of receiving notice from a labor organization that it represents or seeks to represent employees. You may ask, what is an LPA? An LPA is an agreement between an employer and a labor union that ensures that an organizing drive is not impacted by union busting techniques, including employee retaliation, and in return, they will not strike or stop work in a way that will impact human services. For technical assistance, there is a link on the DFSS webpage to the RFP. There will be a link to the RFP of interest, and we also have training documents available. Both the training documents and the link will be under the alert section on our website. For questions on registration and e-procurement technical assistance for delegate agencies, please reach out to customer support at cityofchicago.org, and they also can be contacted at 312-744-4357. And we also have our training materials, which includes documents and videos on the cityofchicago.org website under online training materials. Now we're going to delve into how to enter your responses and accepting amendments. Step one, well, before I get started, I want to notify you all that e-procurement has received a slight facelift, so it looks slightly different from the screenshots you may see on this PowerPoint. However, the essential information is more of the same, but if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to customer support, and I will provide that information again later on in our presentation. So for step one, you create quote from the drop-down menu in the actions box, and then you click on go. This will take you to the application page where you can get started. In the RFP you are interested in, if the RFP you are interested in has been amended, you will need to acknowledge and accept the amendment to start or submit your response. To accept the amendment, click on View Amendment History. Step two, to begin the acceptance and acknowledgement process, follow these steps after clicking View Amendment History. First, you click on the document number. Next, you click on the infinity or eyeglass icon to review the amended changes to the RFP. And then lastly, you click on Acknowledge Amendments button to acknowledge receipt and understanding of these changes and then proceed. By acknowledging the amendment, you are indicating that you are aware of the changes made to the RFP in the amendment. Step three, when you see this screen, you please click on the I accept checkbox and then click on acknowledge. Once you click acknowledge, you click on yes to indicate that you confirm acknowledgement of the amendment. Lastly, you click on the checkbox that you accept terms and conditions, and then you click on accept to actually accept them. And that is the final step in acknowledging and accepting the amendment. How to submit the application once you accepted the amendment. When you entered all of your information, attached all of your attachments, and you're ready to submit, you start by saving your draft one last time, and then you click continue. If you are missing information, F&PS, also known as e-procurement, will give you an error message at the top of the page. Usually the error message directs to something left undone in the application. In the last example, the error message indicated that the lines found under the Lines tab had not been filled out. In this example, the error is about an unanswered question in the application or requirement section. The quote value refers to your, in this case, missing answer. Once your application is free from all errors, you are now ready to proceed and submit. At this point, clicking continue should put your application into the review and submit phase. Once you get to this screen, this is like a summary page, and this is also your last chance to review all of your data and confirm that everything is accurate. Please check your attachments and scroll to the bottom of the screen to see all of your responses. And then at the bottom of the screen, you will be asked to provide an electronic signature. But please be sure to fill in that signature before checking the box. And then once you check the box and you submitted your signature, you click submit. Make sure that you see this submission confirmation screen. The e-procurement system will send a confirmation email within 24 hours of your submission, but you can call me or email me if you desire confirmation prior to then. And now we're gonna pause for one more time for questions. And we don't have any questions right now in the chat, but we do have up until October 17th, which is the question deadline to submit any questions. And those questions can be submitted to Laura Ng. Her contact information is 312-743-1939. And her email is laura.ng@cityofchicago.org. And for non-programmatic questions, if you have any questions regarding e-procurement, the e-procurement hotline is always available Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, 312-744-4357. And their email is customersupport@cityofchicago.org. And you can also reach out to me. My name is Jillian Black, and my email is jillian.black@cityofchicago.org. And Adriana and Laura, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't think so. I think we're really excited that we're able to provide this opportunity.
Okay. With that being said, thank you for attending our webinar, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.